Hey there, it's Silver. This is Selaco. So this is an extremely impressive FPS project that's made in GZ Doom. And this is so far the only GZ Doom engine game that I've played that legitimately doesn't feel at all like that's what it is. The amount of effort that's been put into modifying this and making it work the way that it does is just so impressive it almost boggles the mind a little bit. But overall it creates a really fun shooter with a lot of really cool environmental effects and things that add a huge amount to the combat and the exploration and the atmosphere. But first off, the obvious question that has to be tackled, is this a boomer shooter? No, it's not really. This is not so much inspired by games like Doom or Quake as it is inspired by the sort of mid-2000s shooter market. So games like Fear, Prey 2007, Doom 3, that kind of thing. And you can honestly feel the inspirations throughout the whole game, and especially Fear, I would say, is definitely one of the biggest ones, but it's far from the only one. And it creates this pretty interesting experience where you've got more of a classic shooter art style, and of course, being made on GZ Doom, it is related to the Doom DNA regardless, but it means that mechanically and atmosphere-wise and stuff, it's really kind of hitting more for like the mid-2000s and related times in shooters, which is pretty cool because we don't often see that sort of thing, and seeing it done this well is definitely a positive. So the basic setup is you are on a sort of second chance for Earth's population after some difficult to describe event happened, some sort of fall that basically sounds like it's, you know, like a post-apocalyptic kind of idea, but everyone is transitioned to the space station for a second chance. Well, everyone that's currently alive. And you are Dawn, who is a security personnel member on the station, and right at the beginning of the game, when some of your other plans that I won't be talking about because spoilers are coming to fruition, you get invaded by aliens. The aliens do sound and act human in a lot of ways, but they do bleed bright purple, which does kind of put them deeper into alien territory than at first you might think. So basically what you're doing is trying to do your original plans that, again, I'm not going to be talking about because they are story related, and while trying to accomplish these tasks, you're also trying to navigate this invasion and sort of defend the station, or at the very least push through the areas of the station you need to go through to complete your other goals. Exploration-wise, the game uses a kind of interesting level setup because it uses some elements that we've seen in previous shooters, but they're sort of irregularly used, and I mean that in a good way. So you do have some hub levels, some big, wide-open levels that branch out into multiple areas that you'll be returning to a couple of times as you go through the other areas to, you know, complete various missions and things. But the game isn't structured entirely around those hub levels is kind of the interesting thing. You will have some of those, but not all of the levels are actually one of those. Sometimes you will instead transition to a more linear, sort of objective-based level that's still quite large and sprawling, but you're only going to go through the one time mostly, and then you'll end up in a different hub level later, so they're almost like really elaborate corridors between hubs, and the game kind of switches between these larger hub zones with multiple subzones for you to explore, and more linear, sort of scripted areas in between. The levels themselves are pretty much always really large. Whether you're talking about one of the hubs or one of the more scripted sequences, they are quite sprawling and very complex in terms of how they're put together. But the game does a couple of clever things to help make sure you don't get lost very often in this game. And despite the overall complexity of the level design, I only found myself truly lost about twice. And this is mostly because, despite the complexity of the levels, they're signposted really well in multiple simultaneous ways to make sure you know where you should be going at any given time. Because, for one, enemy spawns are important. Areas that are important will have new enemies in them, and areas that you need to go back to will repopulate with enemies to let you know that it's time for you to go back there. So you can track the overall progress through a level pretty easily just by, you know, where the fights are. Just wherever enemies pop up, that's probably an important place right now that you should go check out. And the other major way of signposting is green light. Just look for the green stuff. If you're lost and don't know where to go, look for something that glows green, because 9 times out of 10 the level is going to have a passage or a vent or a door or a wall even, something that has a pretty obvious green light on it, and that's the way that you need to be going at that time. So when you combine those things with the pretty good auto map the game has, as well as the fact that the auto map will circle certain areas in a bright circle to let you know that that's kind of the relevant area currently, you put all this together and you get really navigable levels. Despite how complex they are usually really easy to find your way around. I did mention I got lost a couple of times, and both of the major times that I was unsure where to go next, it was either a vent kind of up on the wall or a nook, a sort of destroyed bit of wall that I could crawl through. So basically some sort of hole I could crawl in was what I was missing. And honestly, once I actually did see it, it was usually signposted in green, so I can't really blame the game for those mistakes. It was more that I just wasn't paying enough attention to see them at first. There are also a load of secrets in this game. I played through the entire thing on hard, and the entire thing meaning the first chapter that's currently available. And on hard mode, it took me 8.5 hours to get through it, and I only found about half the secrets. And I am a prodigious secret hunter. I will take extra time, as much time as I need, if I think that I'm missing stuff in a level. I don't mind slowly going through and humping every wall just to see what's there. So as much as I was hunting for secrets, the fact that I only found about half of them tells me that there's a lot of different ways this game hides its secrets, and it's very well worth finding them because the game has a lot of different ways to reward you for finding them. And in fact, I even found some secrets that were within secrets. So once you uncovered a secret, there was still an extra secret to find in that one that led you to something else, oftentimes a really useful secret upgrade or something, like the teddy bear grenade launcher, for instance. There's also a good amount of interactive elements in the levels in terms of progression and little gimmicks that make some of the levels different than others. Like there's an entire section of sort of office areas where you have to push these big barrels around to weigh down switches. That's just different because none of the other levels really do that, so it's an interesting little gimmick just for that one section, and it does do that repeatedly throughout several of the larger, longer sections of levels. It will provide some sort of mechanical gimmick to make that level a bit different, like say the giant mall, which is a big hub that's really fun to go around and has some really fun firefights in stores and stuff, but it also has a sort of north and south wing where you've got to go and find these key cards and stuff, and it makes the overall exploration of the area a little bit different than the previous levels. But as good as the exploration and secret hunting and stuff is, the real star of the show here is the combat. And that's partially because the guns are really, really satisfying to use. They have really excellent sprites with a lot of detail in them and some fun animation and bright muzzle flashes that can cast light on the environment and stuff like that just to make them all look really good. But the main feature for me of the combat is the environmental reactivity. As soon as a firefight starts, stuff will just explode and go flying everywhere, and it's only after the destruction is over, where everything kind of slowly rains down and returns back to silence, that you sort of get how much stuff just happened. This is usually a cinematic effect. This is something that's used in movies a lot, so think like John Woo's movies like Hard Boiled or The Matrix, for instance, stuff like that has all these really reactive environments where during a firefight, stuff is just exploding. Like a 200-page phone book gets shot and explodes into 500 pages. That's something I've heard people say about how those movies work, and that's true. That's exactly how they work. Everything gets shredded and explodes in a really satisfying way, and it looks fantastic. And during the firefight, there's just crap flying everywhere, and it makes the area look really dynamic. This is something that this game does, and clearly has put a lot of effort and focus into replicating in video game form because it does it so well. There are little details about how these particle effects and things work that even larger budget, sometimes AAA games don't always do. Like, for instance, even your footstep sound changes when you walk over broken glass. Or how when you fire a gun through a hedge, it'll actually change the particle effect at the area that the bullet should be going through the hedge, even though it's a 2D object, and it will create sort of shredded leaves that fly all around the area, just to demonstrate that you are firing through a plant. It's a small detail, but it matters a lot in the overall feedback and feel of the combat. Pieces of wall can come apart, fire extinguishers can explode and create an obscuring fog in the area that actually hurts both you and your enemies in terms of your ability to see, which is a nice bit of AI detail that they don't just magically see through it because they're AI. Sparks and glass fly everywhere, paper is kicked up, dust and stuff slowly settles after everything's done. It's just a really, really dynamic firefight environment where every combat is this impressive spectacle of stuff flying everywhere with really satisfying gunplay backing it all up. But you then combine all of this with another thing that was clearly influenced heavily by fear, the first one especially, which is the chatter between enemies. Enemies have a lot of different voice lines, and they'll talk to each other depending on what's going on. If you get hit and run away, they'll actually talk about the fact that, hey, I hit her. And if you are at really low health and you run away, they'll even say that, like, she's bleeding and stuff like that because they're actually chasing you down to try and finish you off. They'll react to what weapons you're using, like shotguns or grenade launchers. They'll actually say what the weapon is when you fire it at them to sort of warn all of their buddies about it. It's really impressive how many voice lines there are for so many different situations, and it makes the combat feel even more dynamic when your enemies are reacting verbally to everything you're doing. The weapons themselves are definitely one of the stars of the show as well because of all the various upgrades and stuff that can modify them in some really fun ways. I only found some of them because I only found some of the secrets, so that means I am missing some of the really cool stuff. Like, for instance, there's a railgun in the game. I never found it. I found a whole bunch of railgun ammo, but I never actually found the railgun itself. But I did find all the other available weapons that I know of. So you've got things like your workhorse assault rifle, which is just a useful assault rifle that's quite powerful, pretty accurate even at range, and has a nice sort of zoom effect, allowing you to squeeze off some controlled bursts at more distant enemies for just good damage at more extreme ranges. But you can also find upgrades that do things like change its primary fire to a 3-shot burst, or add different secondary fire effects. In fact, pretty much every weapon in the game seems to have 4 different secondary fires that it can cycle between, but you've got to find the mod kits to unlock them. And these will look like sort of metal briefcases that you can find sometimes in safe zones, sometimes in just hidden in hubs and stuff, or other times in secrets. But even though there's lots of secondary fires, there's also some things like the aforementioned upgrade for the assault rifle that changes the primary fire instead to a 3-shot burst, which is really ammo efficient and quite powerful, but of course slower when you're dealing with a large number of enemies at once. But you've got plenty of other fun weapons as well. You've got an SMG that can be dual wielded, and the dual SMGs are a really fun weapon that just shreds everything in front of you and kicks up a ton of really fun particle effects and environmental reactivity and stuff, while also being really quite accurate at destroying enemies, even at like a medium range as long as you burst it. It's a really fun weapon to use, although it uses the same ammo as the assault rifle and does chew through it really fast. You've even got things like a sniper rifle, which is of course useful for picking off really distant enemies, including enemy snipers, which are really powerful and you've got to watch out for, especially on hard and very hard. They do a tremendous amount of damage to you, so you really need to prioritize them whenever you see their laser sights. Just immediately go for them. There's also things like a grenade launcher. It's one of those sort of rotary grenade launchers with like 6 grenades in it. Really fun to use, and it can switch between 3 different grenade types. So you've got frag, ice, and acid grenades that are useful in different scenarios, and you can even get an upgrade that changes it into a missile launcher if you want to, which obviously changes how you use it because you're no longer arcing the grenades around and instead you're shooting it directly at things. So it loses its indirect fire effectiveness, but it becomes really accurate at picking off sort of groups or difficult enemies at range because, hey, rockets. The shotgun is very satisfying, important for a game like this. It's a pump shotgun, so you can use it pretty quickly, and it's got decent range too, which I appreciate. This is not the kind of shotgun like a Doom 3 shotgun that spreads out to like half a mile wide if you're shooting it at anything that's like more than 10 feet in front of you. It actually does have like a medium range usefulness to it, and is just really fun to use, and does tend to jib enemies in explosive and satisfying ways. And my favorite weapon was actually the plasma gun, which works kind of like the Doom plasma rifle. It's just, a rapid fire energy weapon that shoots fast moving projectiles, and some of the upgrades for it involve adding things like splash damage to the projectiles and making them fly faster. So it becomes a really powerful weapon for certain enemy types. And then I probably would have loved the railgun because I love railguns in general, and I can imagine with how satisfying all the other weapons are that the railgun is probably really fun to use. I just don't know where it is yet. You'll find these safe zones throughout the area that you can go into, and these rooms have a machine that allows you to spend these things called weapon parts to upgrade your weapons in various ways. So as well as those kits that you can find that upgrade or change your primary and secondary fire, you can also upgrade other aspects of the weapons at this bench. And you can use it to do all sorts of things, really. There are a lot of different upgrades for each weapon, so that's a really cool feature also. It expands your arsenal a bit by allowing you to sort of change how they work, which is cool. And weapon parts are obtained just from picking them up. You'll find them in secrets, you'll find them hidden around the place in just the normal parts of the level. Some enemies drop them, you'll find them everywhere. There are also a bunch of challenges you can complete that reward weapon parts for completing them. You'll also find these yellow cards that are not key cards. They're different, and you need these for unlocking upgrades. You don't spend these, but rather you accrue them across the game, and every certain number of them you get will unlock more different kinds of upgrades for your weapons. So you won't be able to purchase everything for any given weapon at first. You'll have to eventually work your way up to having about 4 of these cards, maybe even 5, before everything opens up completely. Interestingly, after you get to like the second or third of these safe rooms, you'll also unlock a fast travel system, a tram, that allows you to go back to any of the previous safe rooms you visited before, so you can actually go back to old levels and re-explore them. So if you're missing secrets, or you're looking for a clearance keycard, or you're looking to access a clearance door that you now have the access to that you didn't when you were in the level the first time, stuff like that, you can just go back and look around, which is probably something that I'll be doing in order to try and find the railgun. Enemy-wise, they've done some pretty cool stuff. The enemy variety is pretty good, mostly because they can use a fair number of different weapons that pretty significantly changes how you have to engage them. They are pretty smart AI, and they do work together, or at least they give the same illusion of cooperation that Fear did. So it's a really good system of making it feel like they're communicating and responding to what you're doing. It makes the firefights really fun, and on hard mode I found it to be quite challenging, but really fair generally. There was also something that I really was impressed by that I hope they do more of in the future chapters, which is they turn one of the areas into a completely different experience with a totally different atmosphere, a different way to explore, and a different set of enemies that you've never faced before and you don't face again afterwards that completely change how you have to fight. So there's an area in these labs where you'll be fighting against these more sort of biological plant zombie-like enemies, and they're completely different in terms of how they work to the normal invaders. So how you have to fight them and how they respond to combat is very different. So those levels feel like a completely separate part of your adventure to everything else, because for just those areas, you have to do things in a very different way. There's also the invasion tier system. As you progress through the game's main story beats, the invasion tier will increase. And as it increases, enemies will get stronger and will get new extra effects. So it'll start spawning new enemy types you haven't seen before. It will add new abilities to enemies you have seen before. It'll give them things like shields or deployables, turrets. It might even give them mines they can lay, and it can also just enhance everyone's weapons in certain ways too, like just making them deal more damage by default so everyone becomes more dangerous. This is a pretty cool system too, because it gives you a bit of a dynamic feeling of the invasion progressing and getting more advanced as you go, and you've got to just keep fighting against them as they get stronger by getting stronger yourself, by upgrading your weapons, finding all these mods and stuff, and just getting better at the combat in general. Overall, I've had an absolute massive blast with Selaco. I think it is a fantastic shooter, and it calls back to that era of shooters that we don't see a lot of callbacks to yet. It's starting to happen more often. You're seeing some games inspired by Fear, inspired by Doom 3. It's happening, but it's slow, and this is probably the best one of those that I've played. In fact, I'm sure it is the best one of those that I've played so far. It's just really, really solid. And there's also, of course, the big question, it's in early access, it's not done yet, am I ruining the experience for myself by buying it now? And in my opinion, you're not, for 2 specific reasons. One reason is it's extremely well polished. They have put into early access only the first chapter, but they've obviously gone over the first chapter with a fine-toothed comb to make it feel as complete and polished as possible. It feels like what the first chapter should feel like in the finished product. It doesn't feel incomplete, it doesn't feel buggy or weird or unstable. It feels really good. And the other reason I would say this won't give you a bad impression, a bad first impression for the game, is that it's kind of like how shareware used to work, except you're paying. It's a bit like, no one would say that the downloading the shareware episode of Doom gives you a bad impression of Doom. It actually gives you a really good impression because that first episode has some fantastic levels in it. And this is very similar to that. It's a lot more levels, but you're paying for them. And I think it's a totally reasonable way to do it because they have put so much polish into these levels that they feel like they're already in their complete form, and you're not going to be experiencing a heavily flawed version of this game. You're just experiencing what's currently done. So overall, I highly recommend Selaco. It is a blast to play. It's super fun to explore, and the combat and environmental reactivity stuff is all mega impressive no matter what engine the game is running on, but made even more so by the fact that it's GZ Doom. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Selaco so that you can go and check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.